There is a report in the Vord Collective's intelligence archives that nobody talks about. It is not classified. Classification implies that someone considered it dangerous enough to hide, and the collective does not hide things. It simply buries them in the weight of its own indifference, files them under headings nobody searches, allows them to collect the institutional dust of an empire that has existed for 11,000 years and long ago stopped being surprised by anything the universe produces. The report was filed in the 44th cycle of the 7th millennium by a senior assessor named Calvor. It concerns a small, wet, unremarkable planet in the outer arm of an average spiral galaxy. A planet the collective had been watching for 3 centuries with the same mild professional interest a physician might give to a rash that had not yet decided whether it was going to develop into something worth treating. The report's conclusion, its final line, the line that caused 3 separate review committees to question Calvor's mental fitness before ultimately, reluctantly, accepting his reasoning, is this: recommend immediate upgrade of threat classification. Reason: this species will drown itself to win. Nobody in the collective understood what he meant. He had tried to explain it many times in the years that followed. He had presented the data. He had walked reviewers through the sequence of events. He had shown them the sensor logs, the audio recordings, the communications intercepts, the before and after of the conflict's trajectory. They had nodded. They had said they understood. They had not understood. Because understanding it required having watched it. Required having been there, in the dark, at the edge of that solar system, on the night of October the 30th, 1942, when Calvor looked at his instruments and saw something that no amount of prior observation had prepared him for. This is what he saw. Assessor's log. Earth Observation Station, Varith 9. The date by galactic standard reckoning is cycle 7441.301. The subject world is the 3rd planet of the Sol system. The indigenous population calls it Earth. Observation has been ongoing for 3 years, for months, and 17 days. The observer is Senior Assessor Calvor of the Vord Collective Intelligence Division. I have been watching this planet for 3 years. I want to be precise about what that means, because the people who will read this report have not watched it. And there is a gap between knowing a thing and having observed it that I did not fully appreciate until I sat at this post. Watching a species at war is not like reading about it. It is like standing at the edge of a fire. You understand the chemistry of combustion. You understand why it is hot. And yet, the dominant conflict currently consuming this world's primary landmass and surrounding oceans began in what the indigenous population marks as 1939. It involves, at its peak, over 30 separate nation-states and roughly 100 million combatants. The weapons they use are, by collective standards, primitive, chemical propellants, explosive ordnance, early electromagnetic detection systems. They have not yet discovered fission, though several factions are working toward it with an urgency that I have logged separately under the heading, concerns requiring future monitoring. My assessment of this species, filed at the commencement of this observation period, was as follows: standard intraspecies resource and ideological conflict. Expected duration, 4 to 6 years. Expected resolution, exhaustion-based ceasefire, followed by territorial renegotiation. No threat to collective interests. Recommend passive monitoring only. My superiors agreed. Passive monitoring. Check in every quarter cycle. File the routine reports. I have been filing routine reports. I have been watching a species tear itself apart with weapons that would embarrass a junior cadet at the collective's smallest military academy. And I have been noting it with the professional detachment of someone who has seen this 17 times before across 6 star systems and has long since stopped expecting it to surprise him. 3 years. For months. 17 days. I was not surprised. I want to note that clearly, for the record, before I continue. I was not surprised. And then came the night of October the 30th. The Mediterranean Sea. October the 30th, 1942. 6 o'clock in the morning. Dawn was still 2 hours away when the British destroyer HMS Petard picked up the contact. The Mediterranean is a closed sea, landlocked on 3 sides, narrow at its western throat, and in the autumn of 1942, as contested as any body of water on the planet. German submarines prowled it. British destroyers hunted them. It was a game played in 3 dimensions. The destroyers on the surface, the submarines below. and between them, an invisible architecture of sound that both sides had learned to read like a language. The sonar operator aboard Petard was a 19-year-old rating named Davies. He had been doing this for 14 months, and he was exceptional at it. Not because he had been trained to an exceptional standard, though he had, but because he possessed the rarer thing. The thing training cannot fully produce. An instinct for the difference between sound bouncing off water and sound bouncing off steel. That difference was subtle. A change in quality. A thickening of the returning signal that most ears missed entirely. Davies did not miss it. "Contact," he said, quietly, the way a man speaks when he is very certain. The word moved through HMS Petard like a current through wire. On the bridge, Lieutenant Commander Thornton had the bearing within seconds. He passed it to HMS Dulverton and HMS Hero, running parallel on either flank. 3 destroyers, 1 submarine, 1 sea. The geometry of the hunt was established in less than a minute, and then the 3 ships began to move, not charging, not rushing, but adjusting with the careful, deliberate patience of hunters who have done this before and know that patience is the only thing that actually works. Below the surface, in the vessel they were hunting, a 47-man crew had just heard the first ping. In a German submarine in 1942, the sound of enemy sonar is a particular kind of dread. It is not loud. It does not shake the hull or rattle the gauges. It is, in fact, almost gentle, a soft metallic note that passes through the water and through the steel and into the ears of every man aboard. And what makes it dread rather than simply noise is what it means. It means someone up there knows roughly where you are. It means the net is out. It means the question is no longer whether they have found you, but whether you are clever enough and lucky enough to make them lose you again before they get close enough to kill you. Captain Lieutenant Hans Heitmann, commander of U-559, heard the ping and said nothing. He was not the kind of man who said things when silence was available. He had commanded this vessel for 2 years through the worst theater of submarine warfare on the planet. And he was alive because he had learned early that the 2 things most likely to kill a submarine commander were panic and overconfidence, and that the antidote to both was the same. Keep thinking. Keep the variables in your head. Keep adjusting. He adjusted course, reduced speed, sought the thermal layer, the boundary between water masses of different temperatures that scattered sonar like fog scattered light. It was a standard move. It bought time. Aboard Petard, Davies tilted his head and listened to the echo change and adjusted the bearing. The hunt had begun. Log entry, 600 hours. I am tracking a standard predator-prey engagement in the body of water designated Mediterranean. 3 surface vessels pursuing 1 submerged vessel. Military engagement, destroyer class versus submarine class. This is the 207th such engagement I have logged in 3 years. I log it for the record. I expect it to resolve within 2 to 3 hours, the historical average for this type of pursuit when the surface vessels achieve initial contact. I am noting one minor anomaly. The submerged vessel's commander appears to be demonstrating above-average evasive capability. This is unusual, but not unprecedented. Logging for record. Continuing standard observation. I do not expect this to be interesting. 17 hours later, U-559 was still alive. Not comfortably alive. Not alive in any way that Heitmann would have described as a situation he wished to be in, but alive, submerged, moving. The air inside the submarine had become a serious problem by the 6th hour. Sealed metal tubes full of men have a finite oxygen supply, and the crew had been breathing recycled air since dawn. It had taken on the quality of something used, thick, stale, with an undertaste of diesel that never fully left the back of the throat no matter how many hours you spent breathing it. Men moved slowly, conserving. Some lay in their bunks with wet cloths pressed to their faces, performing the small animal logic of creatures in distress. If I am still, I need less. If I need less, I last longer. Heitmann stood in the control room and watched his gauges and did not let his face show what the gauges were telling him. The depth charges had come in patterns throughout the day, not constant. The British were too smart for constant, which would have allowed him to map the rhythm and exploit the gaps. Intermittent was worse. The silence between charges was its own kind of torture, because every second of silence was a second in which his crew allowed themselves to hope. And hope, in a sinking situation, is a liability. It occupies the part of the brain that should be calculating, should be planning. Should be keeping the variables in order. Heitman did not hope. He calculated. The calculations were getting worse. He had tried everything a submarine commander with 17 months of Atlantic experience could try. Deep runs, course reversals, speed reductions so extreme the boat was barely making steerage way. Thermal layer after thermal layer, each one used and discarded when the British found him again. Always found him again, with the tireless persistence of men who had apparently decided that this particular submarine was the most important thing in the Mediterranean, and were going to remain of that opinion until one of them was dead. By the 14th hour, one of his junior officers had crept close and asked, very quietly, "Do you think they'll give up, sir?" Heitman had looked at him. "British destroyers don't give up," he said. "That is the one thing you must always remember about them." The young man had not found this comforting. He was not meant to. At hour 16, a gauge in the aft section cracked. The submarine's trim went unstable. Heitman looked at the gauge, looked at his chief engineer, looked at the depth gauge, and did the arithmetic. He had been doing that arithmetic every hour for 16 hours. The margins had been tightening since noon. Now they had closed entirely. He stood in the control room of his vessel. His command, his responsibility, the 47 lives inside it, and he arrived at the only conclusion available to a man who has run out of options, but not run out of integrity. He ordered the ballast tanks blown. U-559 rose toward the surface. As she rose, Heitman moved to the scuttling valves, the mechanism that would open the submarine's interior to the sea, and ensure that whatever the British captured, they captured nothing of value. He opened them. Somewhere deep in the boat, water began to come in. The Enigma machine was still aboard. The codebooks were still aboard. The water was coming in. He climbed toward the hatch. Log entry, 22:30 hours. 17 hours. I want to note this because my models predicted a 2 to 3 hour engagement, and I do not like when my models are wrong. The submerged vessel has sustained pursuit for 17 consecutive hours, the longest such engagement I have recorded in 3 years of observation on this planet. The commander of the submerged vessel appears to be, I am searching for the right word, exceptional, by the standards of this species, by the standards of any species I have encountered. The vessel is now surfacing. The engagement is entering its terminal phase. I am preparing the standard outcome log. The surface vessels are bringing weapons to bear. The submerged vessel's crew is emerging through the upper hatch with their appendages raised. The universal signal among this species for, I am no longer fighting. The surface vessels are ceasing fire. They are deploying smaller watercraft to collect survivors. The engagement is over. The outcome is logged. The winning faction has achieved its objective. I am preparing to close the observation file. Something is making me not close it. I cannot explain this. I am a scientist. I do not act on feelings. But there is something in the sensor data, some quality in the behavior of the crew aboard the winning vessel, that is making my hand hover over the control that would end this observation. I am going to leave the file open. I am going to keep watching. I almost certainly will have nothing further to report. The moment U-559 broke the surface, Petard's gun spoke. It was brief. The German crew was emerging with their hands up, stumbling down the outer hull into the dark water, and Thornton pulled the guns back quickly. These were men surrendering, not fighting, and the laws of war were still laws even in the Mediterranean at 11 o'clock at night. The searchlights swept across the water. German sailors in the sea, some swimming, some floating with the spent stillness of men who have given everything they have and found the bottom of themselves, and are now simply waiting for whatever comes next. HMS Petard deployed a small boat. It moved toward the survivors. Aboard the submarine, still afloat, listing to one side, its bow beginning very slightly to angle down as the scuttling water did its work, the hatch stood open. Nobody aboard anymore. Just the darkness below and the sound of the sea. And somewhere inside, a machine with rotors and springs and settings that changed every day. And beside it, a stack of books that described those settings in terms that, in the right hands, could unlock every secret the German Navy had sent by radio for the past year. Tony Fasson stood at Petard's rail and looked at the submarine. He was 29 years old, a lieutenant. He had been at sea since the war began, and he had the kind of face that 3 years of wartime service produces. Older than the number says, quieter than the man was before. He was not a man who made speeches or performed courage for an audience. He was a man who stood at rails in the dark and looked at things and decided. He looked at U-559. He thought about what might be inside it. He did not know about Enigma. He had not been briefed on Bletchley Park, on the code breakers, on the naval cipher that had gone dark and was currently costing Allied convoy ships and men at a rate that the Admiralty described in their internal documents with the word catastrophic. He did not know any of that. What he knew was this. That was a German submarine. It had been worth 17 hours of pursuit. It was sinking, and whatever was inside, it was going to the bottom of the Mediterranean in. He looked at the angle of the bow, minutes. He turned to the man standing next to him. Able Seaman Colin Grazier, 22 years old, from Tamworth, in the English Midlands. He had been standing at the same rail, looking at the same submarine, thinking what? Nobody ever found out. What he thought in that moment was his alone and went with him. Fasson said something to him. The accounts differ on what the words were. They always will. But whatever Fasson said, Grazier's response was to immediately sit down and start removing his boots. Fasson went over the rail first. He hit the Mediterranean and the cold seized him. The particular cold of the sea in October, not the killing cold of the North Atlantic, but cold enough. Cold that tightens everything and turns every movement into a negotiation between your will and your body's better judgment. He swam hard toward the submarine. 60 feet, maybe 70. He covered it fast. Behind him, Grazier entered the water. And then, a third person went over the rail. Tommy Brown, 16 years old. Not a sailor. Not a military man. A canteen assistant. A civilian boy whose job was to serve food and wash dishes and stay out of the way during combat operations. He looked at the two men swimming toward the sinking submarine. He went in after them. Nobody told him to. Nobody ordered him. He simply looked at what was happening and decided that he was part of it. Log entry, 22:47 hours. I need to document what I am seeing with precision because I suspect that when I file this report, it will be questioned. The engagement is over. The enemy vessel is neutralized. Its crew is in the water. The winning faction has achieved a complete military victory, and 3 members of the winning faction have just jumped into the water and are swimming toward the sinking enemy vessel. I am running this through my behavioral models. I am asking the models, what survival advantage is gained by boarding a sinking vessel? The models are returning, none identified. I am asking, what resource acquisition is achievable in the time remaining before the vessel sinks? The models are struggling. The vessel is sinking at a rate that gives the individuals inside it, at maximum, 4 to 5 minutes before the angle of descent makes exit impossible. In 4 to 5 minutes, in a dark vessel filling with water, with no prior knowledge of the vessel's interior layout. Wait, I am running a new query. What is aboard that vessel? I am enhancing my scan resolution. I am detecting paper, documents, machinery consistent with cipher technology, communication equipment. They are going into a sinking vessel to retrieve communication cipher materials. They are going to the bottom of the sea. For paper, I am sitting with this for a moment. I have observed this planet for 3 years. I have watched these creatures invent reasons to kill each other with admirable creativity. I have watched them demonstrate bravery of the conventional kind, charging into fire, holding positions under bombardment, the ordinary, extraordinary courage of creatures who are afraid and act anyway. I thought I understood the range of what they were capable of. 3 individuals. A sinking vessel. Paper. I am watching and I am not writing anything because I do not yet have language for what I am watching. I am just watching. Fasson reached the submarine first and pulled himself up onto the hull. The steel was slick, cold, tilting. He found his footing and moved to the conning tower hatch. Open, dark, leading down into the vessel's interior like the entrance to something that had already decided it was done with the surface world. He went down. Inside, the emergency lighting was failing. Every few seconds a dim reddish glow pulsed from somewhere and then faded, giving him just enough to navigate by and not enough to feel certain about anything. The floor plates were wet. Water was moving beneath them, finding its way in through the open scuttling valves, patient and inevitable and completely indifferent to anything Fasson needed from this boat. He moved forward by the map in his head. German submarine schematics. He had studied them. He knew where the radio room would be, forward of the control room, port side, cramped. Everything in these boats was cramped. He moved through the control room in the dark with his hands out, finding surfaces, orienting himself, and the boat groaned around him with the sound of a structure beginning to have serious doubts about its own integrity. He found the radio room. The Enigma machine sat on its mount, rotors visible even in the failing light. The machine itself looking absurdly ordinary for something that had been at the center of the most consequential cryptographic effort in the history of warfare. Beside it, in a waterproof bag, were the code books, the short weather cipher, the short signal book, the settings documents that described how the machine's rotors were configured, the entire inner logic of a system that had been sending Allied sailors to the bottom of the Atlantic for 2 years. Fasson grabbed them. He moved back to the hatch. Grazier was there, on the hull outside, reaching down. Fasson passed the documents up. Grazier passed them to Tommy Brown, who carried them down to the small boat that Petard had pulled alongside. Brown ran, came back, went down the hatch again. The submarine's bow dipped another degree. Fasson went back into the radio room. There was more. There was always more. In these situations, the nagging knowledge that you have not gotten everything, that something important is still in there, that the job is not finished. He could hear the water below him now, not dripping, moving, spreading across the lower deck with the quiet confidence of something that knows it has already won and is simply taking its time arriving. He found more documents, passed them up. Brown ran again, came back. From the surface, voices, growing louder. The crew of Petard had seen the angle of the submarine's bow and understood what it meant, and the shouting had taken on a new quality, not the urgency of people giving instructions, but the urgency of people who are frightened on behalf of someone else. Get out. She's going. Fasson heard it. He went back into the radio room. Log entry, 22:58 hours. The vessel's descent angle has increased to 11 degrees. At this rate, uncontrolled descent will begin in under 2 minutes. The 3 individuals are still aboard. The crew of the surface vessel is shouting. I have full audio resolution. They are using the personal names of the individuals inside. They know these people. They are not shouting at strangers. They are shouting at people they eat meals with and stand watches with, and whose lives are a daily and ordinary part of their own. They are shouting, get out. She is going. Get out now. The individual designated Brown, the youngest, the boy, has just emerged through the hatch carrying documents and passed them to the small boat alongside. He is climbing back toward the hatch. He is going back in. I want to be precise. This is not the behavior of individuals who do not understand the danger. Their own bodies understand the danger. I can detect their elevated physiological responses from orbit. Heart rates elevated. The chemical signature of creatures experiencing acute fear. They are afraid. They are going back in anyway. Not because they are not afraid. Because they have decided that what is in that boat is worth being afraid for. I have classified 842 combat deaths in my career. I have watched creatures die for territory, for resources, for ideology, for the protection of their families and their young. These are all categories I understand. Fear overcome by survival imperative. Fear overcome by protective instinct. Fear overcome by tribal loyalty. I do not have a category for fear overcome by the possibility that paper documents might help strangers they will never meet win a war whose outcome they will not live to see. The vessel is at 13 degrees. They are still inside. I find that I have stopped breathing. This is, of course, impossible. I am a machine intelligence operating sensor arrays from orbit. I do not breathe. And yet something in my processing has taken on the quality of held breath, of a system that has suspended its normal functions in order to focus everything on a single point. The hatch. I am watching the hatch. Tony. The voice was raw. One of the senior ratings on Petard. A man who had served with Fasson for 8 months and had the particular helplessness of someone watching a thing happen from a distance that might as well be a mile. Tony, she's going, get out. The bow lurched down. A wave broke over the forward hull and ran back along the deck toward the conning tower, foaming white in the searchlight beam. The small boat alongside bucked, and the men in it grabbed for the sides. Tommy Brown was at the hatch. He screamed down into it. Later, he could not remember what he said. He remembered screaming. He remembered the sound the submarine made, a long, tearing groan that came from somewhere deep in the structure. The sound of metal accepting a fate it had been resisting for several minutes. A hand appeared at the hatch, then an arm, then the voice from below. Fasson's voice, saying, one more thing. Just one more. 30 seconds. Brown grabbed the arm. He could not get purchase. He was 16 and soaking wet, and the hull was moving beneath him, and the men in the small boat were screaming at him now too. Brown, get off her. Get in the boat. Get in the boat. Strong hands grabbed him from behind. Two of the men from the small boat had come up onto the hull, against everything their instincts told them, and they pulled Tommy Brown off the hull and into the boat and held him there. He fought them. He was 16 years old, soaked and terrified, and he fought trained sailors with everything he had, because Tony Fasson and Colin Grazier were still in that boat, and he was not ready to accept what the men holding him already knew. The bow went down with a sound like nothing Tommy Brown had ever heard before or would ever hear again. Not a splash, not a crash, a vast, oceanic submission, the sound of something large accepting the sea's authority, the sound of the surface closing over a thing that had last seen air 17 hours ago and would not see it again. The hatch went under. The conning tower went under. And then the Mediterranean was flat and black and immovable, as if U-559 had never existed, as if Fasson and Grazier had never existed, as if the last 3 minutes had been a story someone told and not a thing that happened. The documents were in the boat. The boat pulled back to Petard. Nobody spoke. Log entry, 23:04 hours. The vessel has sunk. The two remaining individuals did not exit. I am sitting with this. I am aware that this is not a scientific response. Scientists do not sit with things. Scientists observe, classify, log, and move to the next data point. That is the job. That is what I have been doing for 3 years on this posting, and for 17 years before that across 6 star systems and 260 observation assignments. I am sitting with this. The one called Fasson went into that vessel knowing what he was doing. I know this because of the sequence of his actions, deliberate, efficient, purposeful, not panicked, not confused. He went in knowing the boat was sinking, and he went back in knowing it was sinking faster, and he went back in again, and he did not come out. The one called Grazier followed him without being ordered to, without being asked to, as far as I can determine. He simply followed. I am going to write the rest of this entry now, in the clinical language my position requires. And if that language feels insufficient, that is because it is insufficient. And I am going to file this report anyway, and let the review committee decide what to make of it. Here is what I observed tonight, stated plainly. 2 members of a species I classified as primitive and non-threatening boarded a sinking enemy vessel without orders, without full knowledge of what they were retrieving or why it mattered, and did not leave when they had the chance, and went back for more when they should have been leaving, and went back again, and did not come out. They did this for paper. They did this for strangers who would never know their names. They did this without any reasonable expectation of personal survival. I have been watching this planet for 3 years, and I classified these creatures as beneath serious attention, and I want to state clearly, for the record, before I continue, I was wrong. I do not know yet in what specific way I was wrong. I do not know what category this behavior belongs to. I do not know if Fasson and Grazier were typical or exceptional, representative or anomalous. But I know this. I have never watched anything like this before. Not once. Not in 17 years. Not anywhere. Continuing observation. 6 weeks later. Bletchley Park, Buckinghamshire, England. The documents arrived wrapped in waxed canvas, in a crate that had been logged and rushed by car from the naval base at Alexandria, with a priority classification that the couriers carrying it had not been told the reason for. Only that it mattered. Only that speed was the thing. Only that whatever was in the crate was worth driving through the night for. The people at Bletchley Park received it in a state of controlled desperation. They had been in the dark since February. That was how they thought of it, in the dark. In February of 1942, the German Navy had upgraded their Enigma machines with a 4th rotor, and overnight the naval cipher had closed like a door being shut in a face. Everything the codebreakers had built, all the techniques and the intuitions and the analytical frameworks accumulated over 2 years of painstaking work. None of it worked anymore. The door was shut. The lights were off. And out in the Atlantic, where the Allied convoys ran their gauntlet between the American coast and Britain, the submarines had found the dark useful. The slaughter was of a scale that the British Admiralty's internal communications described with the word unsustainable, which was their careful way of writing the word losing without having to see it on the page. The short weather cipher. The short signal book. The codebreakers opened the crate, and looked at what Fasson and Grazier had brought them from the bottom of the Mediterranean. They did not sleep that night. They did not sleep many nights after that. But this time the sleeplessness had a different quality. Not the grinding sleeplessness of people stuck, but the electric sleeplessness of people who have found the thread and are following it, fast, before it goes cold. The documents from U559 gave them the corner of the puzzle. Not the whole thing. Code breaking is not a light switch. It does not go from darkness to daylight in a moment. It is a grinding process of hypothesis and elimination and mathematical reduction and intuition and revision, and it takes time even when you have the right materials. But they had the right materials now. Within weeks, the four-rotor naval Enigma broke open. Within months, Allied convoys were sailing with advanced knowledge of U-boat positions. The submarines that had been hunting blind prey were now the ones being hunted. The ships that had been dying came through. The men who had been drowning in the Atlantic lived. The historians who wrote about this afterward would estimate that the intelligence obtained in the final weeks of 1942 shortened the war by somewhere between 1 and 2 years. 1 to 2 years of a war that was killing tens of thousands of people every month. The arithmetic of that was staggering enough that most people, when they encountered it, flinched away and moved quickly to something easier to hold in the mind. In footnotes, always in footnotes, those historians noted that Lieutenant Anthony Fasson and able Seaman Colin Grazier were awarded the George Cross, Britain's highest honor for valor. Their families received the medals. Their families received the carefully composed official language of a government trying to explain that 2 men were dead and that this was, somehow, in the final accounting of such things, a good thing. Tommy Brown received the George Cross also. He was 17 by the time he held it. He looked at it and did not say much about it, then or ever. None of the 3 had known what they were retrieving. They had just known it was worth retrieving. Log entry. 6 weeks after the U559 incident. Something has changed. I have been watching the Northern Atlantic communications networks for 6 weeks, trying to understand a shift in the data that I first detected in mid-November. The signals from the Allied military command had, for as long as I have been observing, the quality of people navigating in fog. Reactive. Improvisational. Decisions made on incomplete information by people who knew they were missing something important and were doing their best anyway. The signals now have a different quality entirely. They have the quality of people who know something their enemy does not. I ran the analysis 3 times because I did not trust the result. Each time it returned the same answer. The shift in Allied strategic capability traces back, following the chain of intelligence, following the broken cipher, following the logical cascade from decoded messages to corrected convoy routes to intercepted submarine positions. It traces back to the night of October the 30th, to the documents recovered from U559, to 2 men in a flooding room who went back for one more thing. I am going to file my final report on this incident now. I have been composing it in my head for 6 weeks, and I have not been able to find the right language for the conclusion, and I have decided that there may not be right language for it, and I will file what I have. The war is not over. It will not be over for another 2.5 years. Many hundreds of thousands of these creatures will die before it ends. I cannot change that. I can only watch and record and send my reports to an empire that has not yet decided this planet merits serious attention. I am hoping to change that last part. Final report. Incident designation 7441.883. Subject: Human sacrifice behavior, U559 incident, Mediterranean theater. Prepared by Senior Assessor Calvor, Board Collective Intelligence Division. Classification: urgent. Threat reassessment required. Summary of events. On the night of October the 30th, 1942, 2 members of the dominant Allied faction boarded a sinking enemy vessel without orders and recovered cipher documents of significant strategic value. Both individuals drowned when the vessel sank before they could exit. The documents were delivered to Allied intelligence and subsequently contributed to a decisive shift in the conflict's trajectory. I am aware that summary makes this sound straightforward. It is not straightforward. I have been trying to make it straightforward for 6 weeks, and I have failed, and I am going to explain why. In my 17 years of field assessment work, I have developed a reliable taxonomy of sacrifice behavior in pre-contact species. Creatures sacrifice themselves for the direct survival of offspring, for the direct survival of genetic relatives, for the protection of established social units, for the enforcement of ideological systems in which they have deep personal investment. These are the 37 primary motivators. They are well documented. They are deeply familiar to me. Not one of them applies to what I observed on October the 30th. Fasson and Grazier did not die protecting offspring. They had none aboard that vessel. They did not die protecting relatives. They died for documents, for the possibility that those documents might allow other humans they had never met and would never meet, who did not know their names and would not know their names until historians found them in footnotes decades later, to break a code and win a war they would not live to see the end of. They died for an abstraction, for a possible future benefit to strangers. I have spent 6 weeks asking my intelligence corps to find a precedent in the collective's databases for this specific motivational configuration. It has not found one. I want to be precise about what that means. The collective's databases contain behavioral records from 43 observed species across 9 star systems, compiled over 11,000 years of observation. We have records of courage. We have records of self-sacrifice. We have records of creatures doing things that cost them everything in service of their communities, their beliefs, their hopes. We do not have records of creatures going back for one more thing when the sea is already at their waist. We do not have a category for that. Current threat classification for the third planet of the Sol system, Class 4. I am recommending reclassification to Class 6, effective immediately. I am aware this recommendation will be questioned. I am aware that my evidence consists, at its core, of 2 men and a sinking submarine and a stack of wet paper. I am making the recommendation anyway, because here is what I believe, stated plainly, without the hedging and the qualifications and the careful scientific language I normally use to make my conclusions palatable to committees that do not like being alarmed. This species will do anything to win. Not anything in the vulgar sense. They have codes. They have laws. They have lines most of them will not cross. But in the specific and terrible sense that matters for threat assessment. They have individuals among them who will calculate the odds, understand that the odds are against them, feel the water rising around their ankles, and go back for one more thing anyway, because they have decided, not been ordered to decide, not been conditioned to decide, but decided, freely, in the moment, with the sea coming in, that the possible benefit to strangers outweighs the certain cost to themselves. A species that produces individuals like that is not a species I know how to model. A species that produces individuals like that is currently in the process of industrializing its weapons technology, that will achieve basic rocketry in less than 2 decades, that will be looking at the stars within a century. I do not know what to do with a species like that, but I know what I am recommending. I am recommending we start paying very close attention, because one day this species is going to look up at the sky and see that it is full of things worth knowing, full of secrets that could change everything, full of one more things waiting to be retrieved. And when they decide it is worth going after those things, they will go, whatever it costs them, whatever floods in around them on the way down. They will go back for one more thing. They always do. End of report. Calvor, Senior Assessor, Board Collective Intelligence Division. Historical note. Lieutenant Anthony Fasson, age 29, and able Seaman Colin Grazier, age 22, were both awarded the George Cross posthumously for their actions aboard U-559 on the night of October the 30th, 1942. Tommy Brown, aged 16, the civilian canteen assistant who followed them into the water and survived, also received the George Cross. The intelligence materials they recovered allowed Bletchley Park to break the 4-rotor Enigma naval cipher, turning the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic. Historians estimate the breakthrough shortened the Second World War by 1 to 2 years and saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Their names appear in footnotes. They deserve more than footnotes.